Hi, everybody. Maybe we'll start our social. If people want to introduce yourselves, like anyone that wants to introduce themselves, feel free to either speak up or raise your hand if you prefer to do that. But either one is fine, and we'd love to hear where you're connecting from and what interests you in tonight's topic.
Well, I'll hold forth for a minute. We want to fill some time. Dave Dittemore, Tacoma. I'm normally Dave Tacoma, but I didn't give my last name today. But I'm looking forward to this discussion because I'm, a nice dyed-in-the-heart liberal, but I have a lot of friends who are just completely anti-capitalist. And I ask, okay, do you have a phone? A home? Computer, TV set? Ever flown in an airplane? Boeing, makes pretty good airplanes. Got a lot of benefits from capitalism. And okay, there's excesses. And to me, the biggest problem right now in our country is disparity of income and wealth that we need to fix. But it's been kind of a golden goose for a long time. But I will admit there are problems. But that's the news from Lake Wobegon anyway. Hope to hear from somebody else. And good to see you here.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I share your opinion very much. I won't be going into the alternatives to capitalism today. We did that on another event about the ideal economic system, where I kind of made the case against, pure socialism, not market socialism like the Norwegian countries have, but pure socialism that no one has really implemented effectively, and communism, which also no one has actually implemented in actuality. And we won't be going into those digressions tonight. We're going to talk just about capitalism, but we'll talk about the problems of current capitalism along with what I think is, are some of the solutions. And there are a lot of people that are that are trying to move in what I think is the right direction, and I'm just trying to kind of help accelerate that and maybe move it a little further in that direction. So who else wants to introduce themselves and say where they're connecting from and what interests them in the topic?
Well, first of all, Gary, it looks like you've had
I'll go.
Gary, can you hear me? Oh.
Yeah, I think Jenny was talking first, Carrie.
I can.
Letting her go, and then you can go right after.
Well, Gary, you look like you really had a very restful Thanksgiving weekend. You look very well rested.
Thank you. I actually feel well rested. Yeah, I slept well last night, and yeah. So
yeah, that's all. I'll pass it on to somebody else.
Thanks. Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay. My name is Carrie. I am in the battle. And as far as what I would find this conversation is, I'd like to get into a little bit of a discussion of how capitalism breaks down. I think it's a lot more than just capitalism. It's separate from like what your monetary system is, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a lot of people confuse, and I think we can get a lot more nuanced. We can kind of tease them apart and define our terms and find out what is actually critical or essential to capitalism proper versus we kind of lumped into that term.
Yeah, and when I talk about capitalism, all I mean is that the state doesn't own the means of production, meaning that private enterprise, private companies, private organizations, or even publicly traded, but still privately held organizations own the means of production, for all but, things like natural resources, like water and stuff like that, which are even regulated but usually publicly or privately held anyway. So that's what I mean by capitalism, but we can talk more about that in the conversation, but it won't be in the presentation, the level of sort of clarity that I think you're looking for, just to be transparent.
Is market economy implied?
So yes, market economy is implied for me in capitalism. but that doesn't mean no regulations. Although I'm not getting into, you know, whether or not we should have regulations, because we kind of covered that in the last event, and how much regulation we should have. But we could talk about that if people want to again, just in case people weren't here at the last one, which I'm sure some people that are here tonight probably weren't. So, BE, is that Betsy?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, how are you, Betsy?
Good. I just want to point out some key statistics that our current economic system under capitalism has produced in America. So America is the richest country on earth. It has 38 million people, including 12 million children that are hungry, 1 million people, most of which are veterans that live on the streets. 89 million people are underinsured or not insured at all. And 45,000 people die because they don't have access to health care every year. And we have 2 million people in prison, the highest in the world. And we have 47 million people that have tons of student debt and can't get ahead in life. That is the result of our economic system.
Yeah, and I think there are lots of good criticisms, and I'm going to do some criticizing of our current economic system too. And then I'm going to propose what I think should be the new era of capitalism. But we're not going to get into whether or not an alternative to capitalism is better off. We would be better off with it than using capitalism. Again, keeping in mind that Norwegian countries that use market socialism are really capitalist. They just have a big social safety net, but they are really capitalist countries. They're not socialist countries, even though they use socialism in the name. They're not really socialist according to economic system socialism, which means the means of production is owned by the government. But we can talk about that, Betsy, if you want, if you think there's a good alternative. We're the Free Thinker Institute for a reason. Everyone's ideas are welcome. And I welcome people to present alternative hypotheses to what I propose in the presentation. I just won't go into alternatives to capitalism in the presentation because we did that at the other event. Who else wants to share where they're connecting from? And good to see you back, Betsy, and David, good to see you back. Will, good to see you too. I'm gonna make you a co-host, Will, and Kay, and DLJ, and a couple other people if I see people that are regulars. And I have to lock things down. So anyone else want to share where they're connecting from and what interests them in tonight's topic?
Well, I'll speak.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, go on, DLJ, did you want to go?
I'll be quick. Yeah, it's okay. What interests me is how the hell are you going to change it? That's what I'm looking for.
I actually do have an answer to that. You won't necessarily agree with me, DLJ, because I think I have good arguments that you don't agree with at other topics, but maybe you'll agree this time. Who knows, right? And if not, I would love to hear why not. But let's have the conversation. I'll make the argument, and you can decide to agree or not agree and why.
We shall see.
Okay. Will, did you sorry, DLJ, did you okay, you went on mute. So Will, did you want to go next?
Oh yeah, hi, I'm Will. I'm on the Sunshine Coast, Queensland, Australia. And I'm just interested in the capitalist topic, capitalism subject. And I wonder what ways we could integrate more of a sort of a socialist aspect into capitalism. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think of things like an inheritance tax, which is political suicide for anyone who suggests it, even though an inheritance tax would raise billions of dollars a year, even if it was at like 5% on the estate of the deceased. And those billions of dollars could be used for the community and the less advantageous. disposed. And also another one is, I think, a great idea, I'd love to see it, is a floating luxury tax, which could be adjusted according to inflation, because when they adjust interest rates to curb inflation, it affects everyone, and it usually affects those who can afford it the least. But if they had like a floating GST, goods and services tax, we call it. I'm not sure what they call it in the States. In England, they call it a VAT, value added tax. So it's added to everything you buy, but they could add it to super luxury items and adjust it accordingly. So if you want to buy a watch worth, say, more than $1,000, you pay an extra 2%, for instance. If you want to buy a car worth more than $80,000, if you can afford that, you pay an extra 2%. So I'd like to see that way of getting revenue and redistributing it through society to the extremely wealthy. But they all start jumping up and down, waving their arms at the slightest suggestion that you're going to get into their pots of gold.
Don't say the word redistributing. That's a dirty word these days.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's we actually talked about inheritance tax when I talked about economic systems, and I made that argument that we should have not just an inheritance tax, but 100% inheritance tax over $10 million per child. I would be fine with no inheritance tax under $10 million a child, but then 100% over $10 million a child. But to do something like that, you really need international cooperation. Otherwise, people will just leave the country if they want to avoid inheritance tax, when they're getting old and sick. But there are ways to prevent that from happening if you get international cooperation. I've argued with this amongst friend groups. But thanks, Will. Anyone else want to introduce themselves and where they're connecting from and what interests them in tonight's topic?
Hi, my name is Mike and from New Jersey, and I cannot believe some of the suggestions that I'm hearing, including global dictatorship. Sorry, that was from you, Garrett. But
global dictatorship? When did I propose that?
Just now. I mean, you're saying that if a country mistreats its citizen, then we want global cooperation so they cannot get out of that country with their money.
What do you mean by mistreats their citizens? You mean taxing dead people?
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna take all my wealth when I die, then why should I live in your country, and why should I make that wealth and hire people and do all that? And I work for like one of the top 10 wealthiest people in the world, by the way, and I'm not. I believe that as he gets more wealthy, he's creating more jobs. And that's how he's contributing back to society. So if you say that when he dies, I take away all his money or 90% of it, why do you think that is fair? And if he tries to leave the country that's trying to mistreat him like that, you're going to have a global agreement that, you know what, we're going to steal his money regardless.
I find it funny that you consider it stealing someone's money when the person's dead.
Well, it's his or her money
when they're dead. It's their money
to pass on to their kids.
I mean,
don't tell me that you have a home right now. You build your wealth in your company. I know you keep saying you used to be a software developer and successful one.
Right.
So I'm assuming you made some money. And do you think it's fair that I get all that when you're dead, not your kids? That is not. That
I don't want to debate inheritance tax because that's not tonight's subject. But
okay.
I think it's important that we understand each other's perspective rather than try to vilify perspectives and different opinions. Like, much better to listen and understand other people's perspective and why they came to the conclusions they did, rather than say this is an outrageous idea. Try to understand why someone else thinks it's a great idea. And I'll try to do that with you, Mike, tonight. And I think we're going to come from very different perspectives, especially given that your employer is an extremely wealthy person. you'll probably come from and that you feel that dead people create jobs. We definitely have different perspectives. But let's keep going through the social. Mike's got his hand up, so go ahead, Mike. Good to see you, buddy.
My name is Mike Soren. Everything that has been said is contributes to the problem. It has it's a systems problem with a block, with each of those things being a block with an input and an output, and contributes to a number of feedback loops. Now, if you break the system apart, you can come up with an answer, but it won't be the right answer, because meanwhile the system is producing its own answer. So you need to be very careful about making changes, because the system is barely stable by any number of criteria that measures stability of a system, and it's very prone to a collapse such as we've never seen. So would you rather have, in the last speaker who works for one of the top 10 wealthiest people in the world, would you rather have that one of those people contributing to the, shall we say, the stability of the system, or would you rather have a government of the people, by the people, contributing to the system, which necessarily does not bode to the stability of the system? So we can say that the socialist Scandinavian countries, which are really capitalist because they're running on the backbone of the larger countries that pretend to be capitalist. So the guy who said it's the monetary system is important, is probably closest to being correct. And someone who understands the stability criteria that goes to all of the feedback loops of all of the economic systems in the world, which are in unstable, chaotic competition with each other, are where the problem is at. And it's useful to analyze the pieces, but the pieces are not the whole. The sum of the pieces is not the whole. And I yield the balance of my time.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Just give me 1 second. I have a little logistical thing to deal with, and then I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. All right, so Sherwin, we're gonna go ahead and get started because it's 7 o'clock. But well, actually, why don't you go ahead, do a quick introduction, and then I'll get started after you finish.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm new here. I'm glad you guys are talking about the subject you're talking about. One quick thing I have to say about inheritance tax: who really, anybody who gets rich is getting rich off the fact that the system does exist, to give them the capacity to get rich. So to say that they own everything, that, it's almost like preventing a reset of the game. And you can see any sports league or anything like that, there's a new season, there's new things happening, and how can you possibly expect something to be stuck in generational wealth and to be the most efficient way to run things? I yield my time.
But I ask you, you are in the same exact system. I'm in the same. I live like 50 miles from the richest guy, my boss, one of the richest guys in the world, right? But I'm not one of the richest guys. So it's not the system that created everything. It contributed. Absolutely. And the fact that he's in the US and the US has the free melting pot system is what allowed him to be like that. But it doesn't mean that we own his money. It means that we should encourage more people. That's why people want to come here. I'm an immigrant, right? I'm a first generation immigrant and it's my third country. So why did I want to come here? Because of the freedom. Because if you can get here, you can
Like
make it.
we're not
Sorry,
going to get
I'll-
into
yeah, sorry,
debating
sorry. I
inheritance
yield.
tax because that's not tonight's
I'm
session.
sorry, I yield.
If people
Sorry about
like,
that.
if we run out of stuff to talk about around generous capitalism, we can talk about inheritance tax. I find it to be a fascinating subject. And Mike, I'd love to dig into why you believe what you do. Because you know, the data from the Trump tax cut seems very clear that if you give big tax cuts to the wealthiest of the wealthy, they you know, reinvest that money into making more into buying back shares of their stock, and it increases the value of companies. They don't use it to hire more people. Companies hire the people that they need. Wealthy people hire the people that they need at market price, which is the lowest price that they can get away with, without being unable to hire someone that they need. And I'm going to talk about that tonight for sure. So, Ella, I'm going to let you go, and then I'm really going to get started. We're a little bit after, and I don't want to start too late. So go ahead.
Sure, I'll try to be quick. Yeah, I actually think that I'm pretty egalitarian in my viewpoint, and I don't think goods and services are distributed anywhere near equally. I think we can do better.
Let me mute. Yeah, there you go. Great, thanks.
I think we can do a lot better and not create chaos in our system. I think we can do it peacefully, and I think we can do it gradually, but I think it needs to be done. I think workers produce a lot, and employers and owners make, of course, exorbitant amounts of money off of their labor. And I think they should have a greater share of the profit and have some say over the company in which they are producing the money, and share it with the owner. And I would like to weigh in on one other aspect. John Rawls, R-A-W-L-S. You guys probably know John Rawls, but in case you haven't heard of him, great system. Talks about the veil of ignorance. It is about the class you're born into. And if you haven't experienced poverty, it's not something you ever want to experience. It's associated with stress and trauma, and it's a lack of education, a lack of hope. And we need to give every human being these opportunities. And these disadvantages go across all races, all groups, and we need to look at and find out how to do this more equitably, intelligently, and in a caring manner for everyone that deserves this type of break in life, whether or not you inherited it through no effort of your own or not. So that's where I am on this. Thanks.
Thank you. I think you'll like my proposal, and looking forward to your feedback on it either way. And so let's go ahead and kick things off. I just want to thank everybody for coming. You introduced yourselves, so I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor, now an entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, and I also am the executive director of the Free Thinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you to tonight's event. We advertise to a lot of different meetups, so you may have seen us in a different meetup, but we co-advertise with a bunch of meetups. So we welcome you from whatever meetup you came from. I will share a link in the chat to learn more about the organization, and just to share a little bit, verbally, we're a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. to be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth, and to be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday evening covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry. And we also have weekly members only events. You can apply to be a member. Right now, there are no fees. There may be someday, but right now we're keeping it free. And we basically, and we keep it free to get feedback from people to make it the best experience possible. And then we use that time to apply practical wisdom into our daily lives. We have only one rule in the FTI, which is what we're known as by acronym for Freethinker Institute, and that is to remain polite. And so I will ask everybody to follow that rule tonight. No matter what you say, just say it politely. And if you disagree with someone, I really recommend, rather than telling them why you think they're wrong, try to ask thoughtful questions to understand where they're coming from, and do what we call in the FTI listening to understand, which is where we listen empathetically with another person, especially someone we disagree with. I would argue the more you disagree with someone, the more you have to learn from them by listening to why they think what they do, rather than telling them why that you think they're wrong. We don't really learn from telling someone else why we think we're right. We learn from listening to why they came to their conclusions. And so, want to encourage people to do that, both here and in the online community. I will share the links to the different links to learn more about the FTI if you want to learn about it offline. And I'll try to remember at the end of the night to post a link to our next event. If you like this one, hopefully you'll like the next one as well. So just would like to go ahead and kick things off. Let me share my screen. All right, so I guess I can try to, so that I don't give anyone a heart attack with all my tabs open. So, all right, so let me get everything arranged here, and so that I can see people. For anyone old enough to go on video, we love to see people, but we also do record these and put them up on YouTube afterwards. People are asking in the chat. We do that so that people that can't make it, we have European folks that really like to watch our events, but usually can't stay up quite so late to see them. So we do record them for those folks. So and for anyone that just has a conflict or doesn't feel well, we like people to be able to consume the content later. So that said, I'm going to cover the agenda. So I'm going to talk about the problem with our current incarnation of capitalism, or problems, I should say. There are plural, but one really big one. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about conscientious capitalism, B Corps. I did not get time to incorporate stakeholder capitalism, but it's right in line with both of these, and very aligned with generous capitalism, which includes both of the above, really all three of the ones that I mentioned. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can actually achieve generous capitalism, which is a combination of conscientious capitalism, B Corp, stakeholder capitalism, and then taking it another level further, which is how I extend on existing efforts and create generous capitalism. So let's talk about the rise of what the current incarnation of capitalism, which is shareholder capitalism. So in the 1970s and earlier, capitalism and corporations really benefited all shareholders, meaning customers, vendors, stakeholders of all sorts. There were still lots of problems, but not as big of a socioeconomic divide that we're seeing since 1970s. Shareholder capitalism took place. It started with Milton Friedman's essay in the New York Times, arguing that the social responsibility of a business was primarily and almost exclusively, really, to increase profits. Now, this turned into a legally enforceable paradigm where corporations in the 1970s and 80s were ruled by the judicial system to be required to maximize shareholder value, even if it was at the expense of other stakeholders. And what that essentially meant that is that if for example, CEO said, well, I'm going to do something good in the world, even though it doesn't maximize shareholder value, they could be, the entire company could be sued for making that decision by the shareholders, and the courts would rule in favor of the shareholders, saying that the CEO needs to be removed. And I could probably look up prominent examples where this has happened. I'm quite confident it has, but I don't have examples off the top of my head. I should have put them into the presentation, but I didn't get the chance. But I could look them up if people want them in the Q&A. Just ask me and I'll look some up using my AI overlord friend ChatGPT. So luckily he's not an overlord yet. So so that said, let's look at the socioeconomic divide that has come up since I'm starting here in 1983, a little after the 1970 essay by Milton Friedman. But you'll get the idea from what's happened since the early 80s. The upper income sector has gone from, if you take the entire US economy, in 1983, 60% of economic wealth went to upper income households. Now that has gone up from 60% up to 79%. Now, middle income has gone down from 32% down to 17%, and lower income, who were already only sharing 7% of economic output, went down to 4%, almost cut in half the amount of money that lower income people are making between 1983 and 2016. So this is, basically showing that even though the economy has actually grown significantly, the middle and lower income sectors of society have not shared in that economic growth. And I would argue all human beings are born with an inherent sense of what's fair and what's not. Different people argue in different scenarios about what's fair and what's not. I'm not saying that everyone will always have the same answer, but I would argue we can all detect, really clear examples of what's fair and what's unfair. And I would really like to listen to understand to someone who thinks this is fair. Because I don't get it. Like, this doesn't feel fair to me at all. And so I see this as a big problem. And what is coming about because of this is you get a lot of real anger at capitalism because people think that this is just the fault of capitalism. And so what they're doing is they're gravitating towards the alternatives to capitalism because they blame capitalism for this. But the truth is we've been in the throes of capitalism for hundreds of years and none of this was ever happening. This is really a modern phenomenon since the 1970s. Under Eisenhower, who was a Republican president, we had an effective tax rate, an actual tax rate of over 90%, but an effective tax rate of about 50% for the higher echelons of society, meaning the upper income folks. By the way, I saw a hand go up. We're going to hold questions until the end. By popular opinion, people have asked to see the whole presentation, and then we'll have Q&A after the presentation is over. Because people like to see the sequence of arguments and not have them be interrupted with questions. So please write down questions. I always liked to take questions along the way, but people complained that they couldn't follow the logic of the presentation when we did that. So I hold questions till the end now. So so that said, let's go to the next, and this is where I was saying that it really does violate the sense of fairness that a lot of people have to see that kind of socioeconomic disparity widening and to see the economic benefits of the huge efficiency increases that have happened during that time period going to only the wealthy of the wealthy and everybody else either breaking even or going down in income. Now, there are two new terms, and not super new, but somewhat new, like that occurred during that time period as a response to this level of socioeconomic disparity and other types of problems with traditional capitalism, where the only focus is on stakeholder or shareholder value. where the environment gets completely destroyed because there are no significant economic penalties for doing so, and so it's in the corporation's best interest to do so, and therefore they're legally obligated to destroy the environment. And so these two new terms have come about, conscientious capitalism and B Corps, which is actually a legal structure. And I'm going to talk about generous capitalism, which builds on both of these. I like the saying, standing on the shoulders of giants. These are both giants, and I'll try to stand on their shoulders. And so the third element will encompass both of those, but also go further, leveraging what they do, but taking it another level. So first, let's talk about conscientious capitalism, otherwise known as conscious capitalism. It means capitalism where the company has a higher purpose beyond profit making and trying to benefit society and the world as a whole. And these things should be driving the mission and day-to-day workings of a company. Now, all stakeholders matter in conscious capitalism. It's not just the shareholders, it's customers, employees, suppliers, investors, communities, and the environment. And that's common with, and I'm going to go do a compare and contrast between conscious capitalism, B Corps, and generous capitalism. But conscious leadership is about leading with empathy, transparency, and focusing on the higher purpose, and creating a sense of trust and collaboration within the corporation and the entity. It's about, basically, don't just be great, be good. And I think next I'm going to cover B Corps, which for B Corps, there's actually an organization. Sorry, I have a cold, so bear with me 1 second. So B Corps have an organization that certifies companies as B Corps. And in order to be certified as a B Corp, there's a lot of things that you need to meet in order for that organization to consider you a B Corp. It is also a legal structure that doesn't require the company to focus on just shareholder value. So it kind of, insulates B Corps from those lawsuits that I was talking about, where the CEO and the company can be sued for not doing just what's in the shareholders' best interest. B Corps, that's not an expectation of B Corps by definition. And so it was a really clever move by, I should look up who were the founders of the B Corp concept, because they deserve a lot of credit for coming up with a legal structure in response to the way that corporations were sort of commandeered for shareholder value, which is something unprecedented in hundreds of years of history. Like, that was never the case, but in the 70s and 80s, it just became such that the myopic focus was on shareholder value. And B Corps were a response to that, to say, hey, look, we still want a way to run socially responsible organizations within a traditionally, in what I would call a traditionally capitalist system, one that benefits all shareholders, not just the all stakeholders, not just the shareholders. Shareholders, by the way, for those not familiar, shareholders are people who own shares in the company, who are the ones that are the owners of the company, technically speaking. And so, the transparency and accountability are both key aspects of B Corps, and the regulating body has to make sure that social and environmental performance are in line with their standards of what they consider a good company. And they have to demonstrate that they're working with high integrity supply chains. So, using slave labor is not allowed, and, polluting the environment in significant ways is not allowed, and, taking advantage of employees and, making them work for under horrible conditions is not allowed. They want a level of community engagement and environmental friendliness for companies that are B Corp certified. So is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. And in fact, I'm going to try to improve on it with Generous Capitalism. You can tell me whether or not I have. But it's great. And I'm really striving to be a B Corp with my own company. I can't afford the fees to keep ongoing certification right now. But when I can, I plan to be a B Corp because I think it's a great thing. Even though I am currently privately held. And so there's no threat at shareholder lawsuits or anything like that. I just think it's a good, it's good to have third-party certification that you're a high integrity company. And so I think it's a good thing to do. And the other thing is that B Corps are really intended to look at the long term, not just be short-term thinkers. A lot of people joke that current corporations have short-term memories and they focus only on the next quarter's results. And if you look at the way that corporations behave, that is very, very often true. There are a number of folks who are bucking that trend and really more focused on long-term viability. And I'm also more of a long-term thinker. And so some of us are more thinking in the long term, but B Corps are in that category. So let's talk a little bit about generous capitalism. I'm trying to coin the term generous capitalism. I made it up. So what I'm defining it as is what it means to me. I haven't heard the term used elsewhere. So I think I made it up. But if anyone sees publications saying generous capitalism, point me to them and I'll try to change the name to something else. But I think it's pretty intuitive, so I like to use it. Basically, I think that generous capitalism should be the next phase of capitalism, and actually moves beyond where it was before shareholder capitalism came into existence. It's a level, I think, more generous than capitalism was before it got commandeered. And I think we shouldn't just go back to the way things were before, because there was a lot of environmental pollution, et cetera, before the 1970s that companies got away with because they weren't illegal back then. And so, and it's generally it's not super common to hold companies responsible retroactively for laws that they were following at the time, even if they did sort of unsavory things. We can argue whether or not that's good practice or bad, but it's a common practice, mostly so that, well, I'm not going to go into the details, but basically the idea is very simple. If a company is more generous with customers, business partners, and employees, the customers, business partners, and employees should want to work with the generous company over the greedier companies. And let's face it, if you have the choice to buy a product that's better quality at a lower cost and who pays their employees better than another company, all three of those things, why would you not want to work with that company rather than the one who just makes more money for the shareholders? And so let's take a little comparison between how this concept compares to B Corps and conscientious capitalism. I'm sorry, I have one more slide on generous capitalism. So like I said, conscientious capitalism and B Corps both apply to generous capitalism. I'm building on top of them. But basically the idea is that profits and benefits are shared with those who create them to create a true meritocracy. So for example, in a generous capitalist company, if you save the company $20 million, which I did when I was 22 years old, I saved my company $20 million. If I have a company like, my company Plate Rate, if I start to become a really big, valuable company and an employee can single-handedly save my company $20 million, I might give them $1 million of the savings, right? To say, hey, look, you did a great job. And to me, that's, actually living like what I would call being a generous company, because you're sharing in the value creation and you're creating a true meritocracy where someone who adds a tremendous amount of value actually gets a huge reward for adding a huge amount of value. All employees could share in dividends or profit shares, not small ones like is typical, like a few percent or something like that, but actually spending a significant amount of profit on rewards for those who bring it about. Although I tend to like individualistic rewards rather than overall company profit shares. But you can even be in groups and teams. But I like to create a very, like, for me, a meritocracy shows where the value is added and then creates a reward where the value is added. And so I also think that empowering, and this came up in the social, empowering a culture of innovation where everybody's opinion is valued equally and where the best ideas win. And that doesn't mean every idea is equally valuable. What it means is that, even a low-cost person in a third world country, if they come up with that's paid, a 20th the amount of money of someone in a high-cost country that's in a high-value position that might be their manager, if the better idea comes from the low-cost employee in the low-cost country, if it's a better idea, that idea should win, which is what I call a no politics culture. If you go to platerate.com/careers and look at our culture, I tried to lay out a very clear culture of meritocracy. It's like my dream culture of like where I wanted to work. Before I created PlateRate, I took this culture around to other companies and said, this is the company I want to work at. And a lot of them loved it, but I found that at the companies that I went to, I could make that the culture within my organization, but then outside of my organization, I couldn't control that. And so other people were often, not treated well, that were not, people that I could protect. So that's part of what led me to start my own company, where I could make sure that everybody was treated fairly. Now, radical transparency with close business partners is something that I would like to see be a part of generous capitalism. I do this a little bit with PlateRate, to be honest, but I won't go into exactly where and why for competitive reasons. But an example would be, let's say someone was buying steel from a supplier, and then they were transforming that steel and selling it as a product to one of their customers. If they were to say, look, I buy my steel for this much money, and this is how much my operations costs, and so I have to charge at least the cost that I have plus my costs, and so I have to charge you at least this much, and this is the amount of value that we think we're creating, and so this is how much we're going to charge you. That's the kind of radical transparency with close business partners that you have a close relationship with, that I think would create positive relationships. And let me take it a step further, is if the person you're selling the steel to, let's say you sell a building to them, they would then in turn disclose to the person who's creating the steel, this is how much we're going to sell our building for, this is how much all our materials cost, and this is how much our labor costs, and this is how much we're going to make. And then they basically split the difference, so they share the benefits with each other in a fair way. And that's the kind of radical transparency that I think engenders trust in relationships, where you can actually let a close long-term business partner in to your financial dealings, so that you can make sure that no one is taking advantage of anyone else and everything is done transparently and fairly. And that's where I focus on win-win relationships. In fact, I have a saying, I like to come up with pithy sayings, as those who have come to our past events probably know. And I like to say, where there's a win-win, I'm in. And I'm big on win-win relationships. PlateRate's whole business model is win-win-win between diners, restaurants, and PlateRate. Everybody wins, if people transact through us with the way that PlateRate works. So the generous capitalist companies can also, to be like fair, share equity with business partners. And so there's a mutual financial interest in both companies growing together, which is something that I've offered to prospective business partners with Plate Rate is, look, if you'll do this for me, I'll offer this amount of equity for you, because you'll be giving me feedback that helps me grow my company, or you'll be doing something of value for my company that is so valuable that I want you to win when my company is successful. And that creates a win-win sort of arrangement. But it's not typically done because everybody does the least amount they can get away with, which is what market forces typically are. What generous capitalism is it's bucking the trend of paying exactly what the market bears. And it's saying, look, I'm going to do better. I'm going to do what I think is fair rather than the least amount that I can get away with. And that's the difference between generous capitalism, if I had to summarize it simply, is it's doing what feels more fair and doing what's more generous and more fair rather than doing the least amount you can get away with. And so for me, almost exclusively engaging in win-win relationships and not engaging in win-lose relationships is part of what I envision being a key to generous capitalism. I like to have business partnerships with people who bet on themselves. I, as an entrepreneur, am betting on myself. And so I want to work with people who are willing to bet on themselves. And so most of the business relationships I've created with Plate Rate are people who bet on themselves. So let's do a little compare and contrast. From a purpose perspective, B Corps are about social and environmental impact alongside profit. Conscientious capitalism is about ethical, sustainable benefits and being beneficial to all stakeholders, whereas generous capitalism is about being more generous, using innovation to be more generous, creating, and also being more ethical. Now, the stakeholder focus is really all stakeholders for all three of these, but with Plate Rate, it's a focus on having every stakeholder win at every step along the way, whereas conscientious capitalism and B Corps are more about, we want to take everybody into consideration and make sure nobody's losing. And so I would put the difference between B Corps and conscientious capitalism are, we don't want anyone to lose, whereas generous capitalism is, we want everybody to win together. And we want to all be in the same boat where, when we win, we all win together. Profit distribution is balanced among stakeholders, and there's transparency in the use of profits in B Corps. For conscious capitalism, there's ethical reinvestment. It's not solely profit driven, but the generous capitalism really strives to be more of a cause and effect meritocracy, where the more that someone contributes to an organization, the more they should be rewarded. And so there's more of a but they're also, you also want to compensate everybody like generously. And so there's kind of two levels of generosity. One is merit-based generosity, where the more value someone adds, they get an extra bonus. But then also we try to strive for being above market in terms of compensation, but a lot of that compensation in Plate Rate is win-win. So most of our team members are paid market rate, but they also have a huge equity stake, where when the company is really successful, they'll make 2 or 3x what they would make at market rate. And so or maybe 5 or 10x in some people's case, depending on how much value they've contributed to the organization. And so depending on and so it's basically a focus on being more generous all around. Now, legal structure, B Corps have an actual legal structure and a legal commitment to social and environmental goals. Conscious capitalism is philosophical. There's no legal definition. Generous capitalism leverages the B Corp's legal structure And so it shares that. So really, again, generous capitalism, you can consider including both what's in B Corp and conscious capitalism, but then it's also focused on creating unique business practices that help innovate so as to differentiate itself from competitors. And so trying to be more novel and a better problem solver than other folks in order to achieve that level of generosity, because you need to be more innovative and in order to be able to be more to be able to not have what's called a race to the bottom where you're just competing on a dollar value only. You need to have multiple advantages against competitors, and one of them is being more generous, but you also want unique capabilities that your company has that no one else in the industry has. And then performance measurements. B Lab is the company that certifies B Corps. There's no standardized measurements in conscious capitalism. It's just like it's a concept. It's not a regulated thing. Generous capitalism is more along the lines of conscious capitalism. It's not regulated. It's more the spirit of the thing rather than quantitative at this point. It may evolve into being more specific there. I would like it to. I'd like to have more measures. Measuring innovation is really hard, but I think there are ways to do it. I just, we aren't there yet. This is like the first time I'm presenting this to a large audience. I presented it a week or two ago to a futurists, process mining futurists conference, to a small audience. That was my test run, and then this is the slightly larger audience. So not that much larger, but a little bit larger. And then leadership and culture, basically, we kind of covered that in the prior things for B Corps and conscious capitalism. And then, integrity, innovation, and generosity are the core values of leadership and culture, and meritocracy, and making sure everybody has a voice. Now, transparency, there's high transparency by B Labs and the certification, but the transparency in generous capitalism can go a level further of, things that are normally never disclosed to business partners could be disclosed in generous capitalism. And then, conscious capitalism does have an emphasis on transparency, but not the level of transparency that I advocate for in generous capitalism. But more transparency about business practices and, ethical behavior and things that someone might go, that's unethical to do this sort of thing or that sort of thing. Whereas generous capitalism is like, hey, I'm going to show you my financials in order to have you show me your financials. And then instead of like haggling over the best rate, we're going to like split the difference and be fair with each other and come up with something that is equally generous for both of us. So partnership approach, well, I'm going to skip that, and then I'm going to go to business arrangements. B Corps are focused on ethical practices, conscious capitalism, but not exclusively win-win. Same with conscious capitalism. It strives for win-win, but there's all kinds of business arrangements. Whereas generous capitalism, I think, should be focused on almost exclusively win-win arrangements and create a network of people who want to engage in win-win business arrangements for people who are willing to bet on themselves. Now, why will generous capitalism take hold? And let me first ask, will it take hold? And let's talk about, would you rather, and I posed the question a little early before, would you rather do business with a generous and ethical company or a greedy, unethical one? Most of us would rather do business with the generous, ethical company and get the same product or service at a lower price, or even a better product and service at a lower price, and want to work with the company that just takes less for themselves. and sharing what they do get with the people who make it happen. Now, how can we achieve it? Well, we can't expect the existing cadre of large shareholder value companies that have been historically greedy to do this. Like, they're not going to do this. Why would they, right? They're operating just fine. They're making tons of money hand over fist, and they're paying their officers who are the ones in charge. And let's face it, we live in a democracy theoretically, right? Like, our politicians are voted into office, and so we live in a democracy. But you spend how much time interacting with the government? Very little, right? We vote on voting day, and how many other times do we interact with government and the law? Like, usually their job is to stay out of our way, and that's how most of us want it. Just create some rules, guidelines that make sure no one gets completely screwed over, and that's good enough. But we spend, at least 8 hours a day for most of us, for some of us, 12, 16 hours a day working for our employers. Well, are employers a democracy? Absolutely not. They're an autocracy. They're top down. The CEO can fire anyone they want, right? And without any reason. They don't need a good reason to fire anyone. You can just get fired, because someone didn't like you, or because of any reason someone wants to make up, they can make up to fire you. So they're autocracies. So, like, having a company where there's radical transparency, and where we can have a sense that our voices mattered and that we're valued as team members and employees, and where the company is going to be generous with us, is something that is not going to come from the existing cadre of highly paid executives who can fire anyone who threatens their highly paid privileged position, right? They're just going to fire anyone who tries to say that they should be more generous with other people. And so you can't expect them to do it. So it's going to take the startup space, and it's going to take startups that are being more generous to disrupt the spaces that they play in. And I'm trying to make PlateRate such a startup, PlateRate.com. We're still in the early stages of growth, but we're starting to grow in a way that I think could be really meaningful next year. And that requires being generous with customers, vendors, and employees, all three, and just taking less for the company, right? Because let's be honest, like, companies are considered legal entities in the same way that people are. But are they really, like, meaningful as people? Do they need money? They don't, right? Like, a corporation doesn't need money to survive. It doesn't need to put food on its table. And so having the corporation take less money for itself and giving more to all three of these stakeholders seems very fair to me, right? Why not give the money to the people who create the value, like someone said in the social? And while the margins may be lower, I would argue your market share will be so much higher that even if your margins are lower, you're going to win on the volume. And so I think that a generous company can actually make more money, even though there'll be lower margin. They can make more money as a whole than greedy companies. So what am I doing to make this happen? So I started Generous Capitalist Business, PlateRate.com, which is, the term generous capitalism didn't exist, but the concept existed from the very beginning of PlateRate, and was the spirit of the culture that I told you that I created before I even founded the company. Before I even decided I was going to find a company, I created most of the culture, although I've refined it based on interviews. I always ask people that I interview with to read through my culture and tell me if there's something that they disagree with. And I've had dozens of people give me valid reasons that they had a reason to disagree with my culture. And I applaud those people for being willing to criticize the culture of a company they're interviewing with. And I love that, because that tells me this person's willing to be honest with me, and they're not just going to tell me, hey, this culture sounds great, I want to be a part of it. Like, I want that feedback. And, when all those people had valid criticisms of my culture, I changed the culture, right? Because like, what better thing can we do than if there's a flaw, let's admit the flaw and make it better. And so the culture has gotten much better over the last 5 years as I got feedback from different people that I interviewed about the culture. Now, I also started the FTI, the Free Thinker Institute, and the goal of the FTI, one of the goals, the most ambitious one, quite frankly, is to make every human being on Earth, let's repeat that, every single human being on Earth, enough money that more money won't create significantly more happiness, which according to studies is about $95,000 USD a year today in modern USD dollars. Now, mind you, some studies say that more than that won't create any happiness. Other studies say more money will create happiness, but it's a logarithmic relationship, which means you need a whole lot more money to create just a little bit more happiness, which basically means that the truth is that you're not going to get significantly more happiness from more money after 95,000. So let's talk about playrate.com for just 1 minute about why it's more generous. If you compare to competitors, customers can pay over 90% markup. If you go to DoorDash, you can pay 40%. A $10 burger might be $14 on DoorDash. You may pay a 50% convenience fee on DoorDash. So you're paying $21 for a $10 burger. Well, that's crazy, right? With Playrate, customers never pay more than they would at the restaurant. Customer incentives are often lower than the markup on the food with competitors. So when they say you get 50% off, the truth is you're really paying regular price. You're not getting 50% off. Whereas Playrate has sustainable incentives, even though you're never paying more, you can get 30 to 60% credits. Competitors, restaurants sometimes lose money because the fees are so high, they consider it a marketing expense. Whereas with Playrate, restaurants make more money than when they sell their own food. I can't describe exactly how we do this. That's part of our secret sauce. But if anyone knows restaurant owners, connect me and I'll explain it to them. Employees are basically paid market wage at most companies, whereas I said earlier, employees are paid commensurate with the value that they add in terms of cash and equity compensation. And I will regularly give bonus equity for good ideas or extra effort. I'm very generous with equity because I want people to know that they're valued. And so I give equity out on a regular basis. So will generous capitalism take hold? Well, if fear prevents us from starting generous companies, if fear or lack of research in companies prevents us from shopping with generous companies, and by the way, check out whether or not the companies you work with are B Corps, because generous companies are not certified right now. I'm just inventing the idea here and seeing what feedback we get about it. But if those things happen, shop at B Corps because they're at least more generous than the average company in the industry. But if those things happen, then no, generous capitalism won't take hold. But if each of us puts in the effort to identify and shop at generous companies and prioritizes that over other companies, and entrepreneurs amongst us have the courage to start generous companies and share the money that the company makes with all of the stakeholders of the company in a very generous way, taking less for themselves and for the company itself, then yeah, generous capitalism really can be the next era of capitalism. So that said, is it really possible for every human on Earth to make $95,000 USD a year? I'm going to say today, no, that's not possible, but it is very possible in the next 50 to 100 years. So in the Roman Empire, GDP per capita was about $500 USD a year in modern USD dollars. So, that's a very small amount of money. The world GDP per capita in 1960 was about the same, thinking about the fact that in the Roman Empire, it was 2,000 years earlier, but the Roman Empire was the wealthiest empire around, or one of the wealthiest empires around at the time. Now, world GDP per capita in 2022, what's that, 62 years later, was $12,600. That's a 28x increase in 62 years. Now, if we can't afford $95,000 a year now because the world GDP per capita is only a little over $12,000 a year, but theoretically in another 100 years, we should at least increase by another 28x, in which case the GDP per capita globally will be 350,000. With generous capitalism, everyone should at least be making $95,000 a year, and we would have billionaires and trillionaires. There's no problem having billionaires and trillionaires as long as everybody's making enough money that more money won't buy happiness. And so that's what, I would like to see happen in the next 100 years. So that's the end of the presentation. Now questions, hands, and I would also love to know if this was useful. I always like to ask that. If people learned anything, feel free to write that in the chat, and I'll try to pay a little bit of attention to the chat for people's, whether or not they learned anything. And so first, Abe, go ahead with your question.
Good presentation, Garrett.
Thank you. Good to see you, Abe.
One of the things which based on all what I think we need more regulations. We need to tax the rich. We need to tax big businesses to even out the difference between the rich and the poor. We can't sustain it because if you look at history, every time you had this big gap between the rich and poor, there's always been chaos, and there's been, you can take France with the thing of the stoning of the Bastille, what happened in Britain, what happened with the Depression, and we can't sustain it. And I think it's high time we started investing in our own people. We started investing in education. We started investing in infrastructure. Now what happens? We don't have qualified people. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough nurses. And those countries sit and invest in their people, and we go and poach, or we go and steal from them to help out, in our economy. So something has to be done about it, because this is not a sustainable model. And that's all I have to say.
Got it. I'm just going to try to get a statistic for you, Abe. I'm going to agree with you and disagree with you, and I'm going to try to get the statistic that disagrees with you for a second. But the place where I'm going to agree is that everyone should pay their fair share of taxes. And that's where, I think that, it's important that we recognize that that's not happening based on the statistics that I showed. And that's where I mentioned the top effective tax rate in Eisenhower's day was about 50%. Now it's down to like 20-something%. And so I guess, the other thing that I wanted to say is, Abe, I don't think we need more regulations. If you look at the number of pages of laws we have in the US, it's huge. We have way too many regulations. No one can keep track of them. And what ends up happening then is there are huge numbers of loopholes. But I don't think that's what you meant. I think what you mean is that there needs to be accountability for large corporations and even small organizations to some degree. But there needs to be accountability, and there need to be well thought out regulations. And what I would argue is that regulations should all prevent significant unnecessary harm for all human beings, not just in America, but on Earth in general. And then after that, we should create regulations that increase happiness and decrease harm. And if we did use that as a guiding principle of laws and say laws that don't do those things should not be laws in the first place, which is basically corporate cronyism laws, then we would, I think, get rid of a lot of really wasteful laws and minimize the legal structure, but make it stronger and more aiming towards helping the populace. Does that make sense, Abe?
Yes, it does. I should have said clear regulations. You can't, what I mean is you do have to have some sort of regulations regarding, things like minimum wages. And, the other thing, like various other crazy regulations, like doing things on insider trading, like, if you're a politician, you get all the inside information and you can buy things. But at the same time, if I went and bought stocks based on insider information, I'll be put in the slammer.
Yeah. Isn't that funny that Congress people are allowed to sort of legally do insider trading? and they're the ones writing the laws. Like, wait a minute, how is that fair? That doesn't make sense. And yet that's the law of the land, because they're the ones that write the laws, and that's why they have the best healthcare available to mankind, and it's paid for by taxpayers. But somehow this all seems fine for them, and no one seems to be noticing and holding them accountable to it. So yes, Don John, the Eisenhower top rate was 90%, but the effective tax rate was 50%. The theoretical tax rate was 90%. Next, Ibrahim, go ahead. You have your hand up. We've got a lot of hands up.
Awesome. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for that presentation, Garrett. It was really, really well put together and super informative. I'd sort of written down a bunch of points as you were going through your slides.
Oh, I forgot. Sorry to interrupt you, Ibrahim.
Always.
I forgot to mention in the beginning for questions, and I'm going to let you go, but please focus each time you raise your hand on just one question or comment at a time. You can raise your hands as many times as you want, but because we have so many hands up, if you're the only one with your hand up, you can ask multiple, but while there are other hands up, just stick to one comment or question and try to keep it to under 2 or 3 minutes. Michael wasn't feeling well tonight, so he was tired, so he took a night off as my moderator, and he usually does the time checking, and we may have someone else do the time checking. So yeah, if you could just keep to one comment or question at a time. You're having a bunch reminded me of that, so thank you for that.
Well, I'll no problem. I'll focus on what I think is maybe the question or the point I'd sort of like a clarification on most from you, Garrett. You brought up a bunch of really interesting points. Just very, very quickly, I think the legal precedent we're talking about was Doug versus Ford Motor Company in 90. I used to work with Ford Motor Company in the UK, and the shareholders sued Ford Motor Company for daring to suggest that they might prioritize their workers over profits for shareholders, and that's what set sort of the precedent you're talking about. The B Corp idea that you brought up as a sort of a framework for generous capitalism is an interesting one. But I sense that there's a sort of a systemic issue to a certain degree that exists in capitalism that I feel might undermine the sort of the main goal of the B Corp, which is that fundamentally when you have shareholders that are able to buy into your company, number one, that can massively diminish the amount of shares or equity that you're even able to give to your employers, assuming that you're an incredibly sort of generous person who wants to do that. But more than that, one of the issues is that one of the sort of systemic issues I see is a problem with capitalism, is that capitalism, under all circumstances, no matter how generous, it sees the workers as an end cost to be subtracted from revenue, right? And ultimately diminishes that coveted thing that we call profits in a capital system. And so there's always sort of these mechanisms at play that aren't necessarily, the fault of any individual. You can be as conscientious and generous a VP as possible, but these mechanisms force you to, try and look after your bottom line, which ultimately means that you're working against, your employees, even if, as I say, you've got the best intentions. So how would you propose that be? That sort of be addressed almost? How would we fix that on a systemic level with B Corps when you're still competing, right, with non-B Corp companies that will be much more attractive for shareholders because they guarantee top line profits on the backs of workers ultimately, right?
Yeah, I think it's not. I think you hit the nail on the head that employers currently of current capitalism look at employees as a diminishment of profits. But in generous capitalism, that's not what we look at them as. We look at them as the enablers of the profits. And we want to diminish the profits in favor of being more generous with the employees. Although, I am a big believer in setting up the right incentive systems, and I'm not a big believer in just pay out all of the profits, right away. Like, I like long-term incentive systems. For example, I worked for an insurance reinsurance business, and I saw someone who sold what's called long tail insurance, which the claims come in over a 10 or 15 or 20 year period. they sold it, they made their money, they moved on, and they sold a bunch of bad business that became really unprofitable, but they made all their money and left. Well, a big part of their compensation should have been tied to the long-term profitability of the business they sold, because the profitability wasn't determined until the long term. And so you really have to, be intelligent about the way that you match compensation with value add. Now, if someone makes a change that saves me $20 million in the same year, I'm going to give them $1 million. They just saved me 20 million. The least I could do is give them 5% of what they did for me, right? Like, I'm kind of a jerk if I don't at least do that. But you know what? In today's business, you're not seen as a jerk. You're seen as like, that's business as usual. But we can't look at it that way. And in generous capitalism, we don't look at it that way. We say, you know what? Like, we're going to share, and we're going to share. And it's not a diminishment of profit. What we're going to do is we're going to make the absolutely most talented people come work for us, because they know they're going to get $1 million if they save 20 million.
Okay.
And so you attract the absolute best talent in the industry because you're paying so much better. I don't know if you know this, but if you're one of the best software developers in the world and you're working for Google, you could make millions of dollars a year, right? As a software developer. But Google will pay them millions of dollars a year because they know that they're worth that. And that's just Google, because they are an engineering driven culture and they're willing to compensate engineers really well. But, it can go a whole nother level beyond that. And so I really appreciate what you're saying. And it is exactly the mindset that we have to combat against. And generous capitalism is the change in mindset that enables us to combat exactly what you're talking about, which is the current framework. Ella, how are you?
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and for the meeting this evening. I actually pretty much disagree with you across the board. I think you have good intentions, and that's worth mentioning because that means something. I think it's absolutely naive. I've been on this planet a long time. I'm from a working class background. This is not how it works. And, I wish it could work, but the ideas you are postulating have been around a long time. I remember there were corporations, Apple was one of them. There was Patagonia. They were going to do all these great things, be innovative and support the environment. And, what happened to the jobs? Well, let's look at it not from the capitalist perspective and the shareholders' perspective. Let's look at it from the U.S. workers' perspective. Their jobs were sent overseas for the last 20 years. And you are supporting this. According to what I gleaned from your presentation, that's fine as long as, a country wherever in the world can come up with a cheaper price and a better idea, as you put it. I'm paraphrasing, but, that serves your company and your shareholders. That's fine. Ship the jobs overseas. This is one of the major problems. Okay, we need to pay the workers here in the United States a decent wage so that they're not driving a 10-year-old car, so that they don't lose their homes as they did for 20 years under 2 terms of Bush's, 2 terms of Bill Clinton, and 2 terms of Obama. So they're all involved, both parties, and they just kept shipping the jobs overseas. And yes, historically, it goes back 20 years, and you laid it out pretty well, how it all started. But you're perpetuating that here, and I don't think you're aware of it. We need government control. We need unions, as they have in the democratic countries with birth to death. benefits for everybody. So middle class doesn't have to save all that money. Everybody is taken care of to a great extent in Denmark, for instance, the Nordic countries. But the Nordic countries support unions. The governments support unions. Here, our governments do not support unions. And you say, oh, why unions? They can be corrupt and all that. Okay, true. That can happen in any human organization, and they need to be held accountable to the workers. But your single, and I'll end with this, your singular worker doesn't even have enough $200 in the bank for a major repair. If the hot water heater goes out, the furnace goes out, heaven forbid, they don't have enough savings to cover it. So if we are going to talk collectively about this country, we have to think about everybody, not those in the upper echelon and the, but let's talk about the factory workers. Let's talk about the people that produce for our country, the farmers, the factory workers, the people, in the middle class and on down in the working class. They need support. And without government regulations, nothing is going to change. You're basically whistling in the wind.
Yeah. So the beginning, you said you disagree with everything I presented, but then when you spoke in detail, it sounded like the only thing you disagreed with is about whether or not we should use offshore labor. Is there something else that I presented that you disagree with other than that I think that offshore labor can be useful, and that you think that we should pay Americans a decent wage? And by the way, I agree with you. We should pay Americans a decent wage. I'm not against that at all. But I'm just curious if there was anything else I presented that you disagreed with.
Okay, I think that's huge. I think keeping the jobs here and American-made goods, they were made, I've been around a while, with pride, and they were quality goods. It's a...
Yeah, just, if you don't mind, I do want to actually address what you said, but I want to make sure that I understood it. I think what you're saying is that, yes, you strongly disagree that we shouldn't have offshore labor, but that is the main thing that you disagreed with me on, not the whole presentation.
I can't underscore how important that is, keeping jobs here, manufacturing our own goods.
Yeah, no one is saying that we shouldn't keep...
That's not the only point. Okay, so unions, I made a point about the unions. You didn't address that.
I didn't address unions. So I didn't make any presentation or point about unions at all. So
and government control of government sponsorship of unions, because we have union busting, and your average worker cannot afford to go and say, hey boss, I want to raise. It's not going to happen. They'll say, okay, there's the door. You have to have everybody and willing to go on strike to shut the company down. Collective bargaining is essential for higher wages. So I think you have good intentions, but I mean, I've heard all this before. This all came out like, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago. All of these positive things that corporations were going to do. And honestly, it's just without the government, like somebody else had said here earlier, you have to have more government control over the corporations. Not total control. We like our freedom in America. But this is just whistling in the wind. You're giving all the power to the corporations.
Try to finish your thought, Ella, because I haven't even gotten the chance to respond to your first set of thoughts, and you're now starting a second one, and there's a lot of hands up. So I don't want to shut you down, but we do have to keep the thoughts pithy. So I think we should have a separate conversation about offshoring, because we don't have time, and given there are so many hands up, I don't have time to fully address your argument, but I'll give a very Cliff's Notes version. The 30,000-foot version is that I consider myself a citizen of the world. Yes, I'm a citizen of the United States, but I'm also a citizen of the world. And if we invest money in workers in other countries, and we help invest in those countries, and we help create those countries to have more economic wealth, and we help grow the economy globally, it actually there was a statistic, and I have to look up, I meant to look up the exact number, but it was a book that I read recently, and it basically talked about how if we opened up borders and just allowed everybody to go to whatever country they wanted, there would be like a gigantic economic increase of wealth, like across the board in the world. And I need to look up the study and the data, but it was a book that I read recently on Blinkist. And all I'm saying is that if that happened, we would take all the third world countries and make them consumers of US products, and there would be no low-cost countries anymore. And now, instead of a market the size of the United States, we would have a market 100 times bigger, because we would be selling to everybody in the world, not just to the people that can afford us, which is us and about a dozen other countries. And so actually, if you think in the long term, investing in, having jobs offshore, which, by the way, there's no shortage of jobs in the US, even if every unemployed American was qualified for an open job in the US and took every open job that they needed, there would still be millions of open jobs in the US that are completely unfillable right now. What we need is good job training. We need to teach people the skills they need to have a marketable skill set that employers want. And that's where I think we're falling short. And that's why I teach a product management boot camp, to teach people for very low cost how to be product managers and make six figures as a product manager. It's not something you need even a college degree for. You can just learn how to do it. We need more people doing things like that and teaching the skills that employers want, rather than saying we need to be protectionist and nationalist and protect American jobs. We need to create international jobs and create skill sets that employers want, so that we can help pay people above market wages, which is possible. So that would be my response. But I think, Ella, you have a great point that I don't think we have time to get into like a complete debate on that topic. But I would really like to hear more about your perspective when we host that event. And I will add a note to myself to set up another event to talk about offshoring, because it's one of the places that I disagree strongly with Bernie Sanders and AOC. I think they also have their hearts in the right place in saying that we shouldn't offshore jobs, but I think they have a misunderstanding about economics and making the pie bigger. So that said, I want to let Carrie go next.
Okay, I'll just want to make a quick comment. Main point. Boy, there's going to be an issue to turn the entire world into consumers at the level of the United States. I mean, you want to talk about some potential environmental devastation and resource depletion and whatnot. That's a whole nother issue, though. But I want to challenge an assumption with something that I haven't heard anybody bring up before. But there's this idea that was brought up of fairness, but yet embraced meritocracy. And one of the things I think, this goes to my earlier entry point, capitalism gets a bad roof, is this idea that money is some game. And when rich people accumulate it, they're preventing people at the lower end of the economic spectrum from acquiring it. But in a debt-based fractional reserve system, there's an infinite amount of money. You just have to be willing to sign your name on the line and take out a loan for it, right? And I guess this is, I think, where the rubber hits the road, is when we talk about fairness. Are we talking about equality of opportunity, or are we talking about equality of outcomes? Because one has to be enforced, the other based on the talent that's been distributed to that individual, their motivation, luck to a certain degree, I don't want to call it. But skills are not distributed evenly across the board. And I would argue that your chart showing a divergence of wealth is not of a deficiency of capitalism, but instead that the system is now efficiently distributing people's skills and talents at a higher level that is increasingly reliant on skilled individuals. 100 years ago, farm the biggest industry in the States. You don't need this to run a farm. Now, it builds some talent and it takes a lot of hard work, and I don't want to, impugn anybody field. But I think what you've got now is from grade smart kids are all funneled into becoming lawyers and doctors and entrepreneurs and whatnot. People are able to leverage their skills in a more way working for big companies, and they make fortunes. Whereas folks that are not able to compete in those types of I don't know, that kind of mental horsepower and work ethic and whatnot.
Try to finish your thought.
Are fundified in a society that is automation. Excuse me?
Try to finish your thought like you're going.
Anyway, that's my point.
Okay, so I just want to encourage everyone to try to, think about what you want to say, maybe even sketch it out on a sheet of paper or on a Google sheet or something like that, just to get through it quickly because we have a lot of hands up. But as far as like making the entire world have the buying power of the US being devastating, I don't think that's the case. That's only the case if we scale the way we are now, and I don't think we have to scale the way we are now. Like, we can scale in a much more effective and efficient way, and we'll need to figure that out as a world, no matter what. Like, even the third world is growing in economic wealth, and whether it happens sooner or later, we need to learn how to grow more efficiently and effectively and more in line with a synergistic way with Earth rather than in a way that destroys the Earth. As far as the fractional reserve system, meaning that there's an infinite amount of amount of money, well, let me skip that. Let me go to what's meant by fairness. It's not about it's not about equal outcomes. It's about meritocracy to me is about compensating people commensurate with the value that they add, and having a reasonable minimum of, like minimum wage is a reasonable minimum at which people can make a living wage, not current minimum wage. Sometimes it's not a reasonable living wage, but creating some level of minimum compensation makes sense to me. But then beyond that, like, people should be compensated fairly based on the economic value that they add. And that's a hard thing to put a handle on, but that's what management's job is. Management, has to value how much someone is contributing to a company. And part of what generous capitalism is about is valuing that and compensating people commensurate with that value in a way that is more fair than the way companies do it today. I was interviewing with a company once that, I won't digress because we have too many hands up, but that's what I mean by fairness. And so next I'm going to go to Betsy.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for this talk. As you pointed out, I think, the primary issue with capitalism is that its primary goal is to increase profits at any cost, and that's driven by greed and corruption. And basically, if you have to put it in an equation, is profit over people and planet. And that is what is causing a lot of issues with instability, with inequality, injustice. It causes exploitation of people, exploitation of the planet, exacerbation of climate change, and economic catastrophes like 2008 and 2020. Now, the thing is, where I struggle is, like, how do you curb this greed? And for a lot of people, it's regulation. For a lot of people, they think it's reducing corruption, or, like you said, incentivizing companies not just to focus on the profits. but it's very hard to know how, like, where you're going to get most of your, your bang for your buck. Where should you focus on doing that is going to get you to a better outcome, like they have in those Nordic countries, where they try to put people and planet above the profit. They try to have a strong safety net system that takes care of their population. Now, for me, I think we have to kind of curve, the greed and the corruption with regulation. And there's some questions, there's some lessons from other places around the world. For example, Ella said that the unions have to be strong. So in Germany, they have corporate co-determination, which, if your company has more than 500 employees, 1/3 of your board has to be workers, so that their interests are met. And also in Spain, for example, they have a capping of the CEO pay. The CEO pay has increased by like 1,500% over the past 40 years. And in the Mondragon Corporation in Spain, they have a cap where the CEO can only make 20 times what the average median worker makes. So that's another way to curb this greed. And in America, there's some protections, for unions, making the unions stronger. So like in those Scandinavian countries, they have strong unions. And Biden is actually doing the National Labor Relations Board. If you're trying to bust the unions, like they get automatically in place. Like they're trying to curb those union busting practices that corporations do all the time to fuck over workers, because they don't want them to have collective bargaining. Another thing that people do, and you might not agree with
finish your
this.
thought, Betsy. We want to stick to one thought at a time, if you could.
Right. So like the last thing is just like reducing the waste that we have in America. For example, like you said that politicians, they do insider trading, and there's all this corruption. But for example, the Pentagon, they get their budget increase every year. So their budget for next year is 886 billion, and the Republicans want to give them 80 more billion. And they just failed their 6th audit in a row. They don't know, they can't account for 61% of the money that they have, which is like trillions of dollars. And there's all these waste that we have. And people always say, oh, we can't have healthcare, we can't have education. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Well, we can pay for it by reducing, the waste that we spend on defense. So my issue really is, like, where do we focus on? Like regulation, reducing corruption, or changing the values and the incentive structure of not focusing just on profits, like you said, but focusing on making society a better place.
You gotta finish up. You're way over. So just one, really, everyone, very, very tight questions and comments, one concept at a time. I'm gonna say try to keep it to under 1 minute, because we have a lot of hands up. Under 1 minute. I agree with you, Betsy. The Nordics put people and planet above profit, and I think they're a good example to follow. And they are largely countries that are full of B Corps that have Eisenhower level tax rates, right? So those are good places to be, in my opinion, where the top echelons pay roughly 50% effective tax rate, half for you, half for us, and us as society, and going to paving roads and hiring policemen, and other stuff. I also agree we need to decrease waste, and I also agree we need to cut military spending. I think I said in the past that if I had my way, I would literally cut military spending in half every year during 4 years of a presidency. And then we would actually be in line with reasonable spending for the next highest spender of defense. And so next is Don John, who thinks that we would have a depression, but absolutely not. The military spending, like missiles, are not a good investment. They are the same type of asset as a Ferrari. It doesn't create economic wealth. Just one second, Don John. But go ahead, Don John. Go ahead.
No, Garrett, we would. I mean, you can't take the percentage of GDP, cut the massive quantity out of it. I'm sorry, I had a direct question. You responded to my thing. We would have a massive recession because of the employment levels, both in the military and the sector, but that's fine. What I'd like to say first is, Garrett, is I applaud you for trying to work on an empathetic form of capitalism. And I would ask you that one of the main components of current existing capitalism is competition. And I've been on your calls once before, so you probably know where I'm going. But I would question the ability to achieve any of those things if you don't create a more egalitarian society. Let me explain why, and I want to hear your answer. This is trying to stay within your boundaries. Studies from Harvard suggest that 1/3 of people will always cooperate. 1/3 will never cooperate, and 1/3 will do what the group does. Okay, we sort of almost see that stuff in politics. So what you've got is 1/3 of the people they don't give a damn what you're saying. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be rude. They just don't. They're out. It's exactly what the last speaker said is greed drives our system. And what you're asking for is for 1 out of 3 people to ignore their natural intuition and begin to have empathy. Okay, because that we've got to deal with human beings and the reality of human beings, and we really need to go to the level of the duality of human nature and start to think about it. So that the only operational high-level duality of human nature is competition, cooperation, and you didn't address that, and that I would argue is the cause of all the duplication, the waste, the fraud, everything. It's you, baby.
All right. So I'm gonna give you I'm not expecting 1/3 of people to ignore their natural intuition and have empathy. I think we all naturally have empathy. And I'm gonna give you a quote by a very wise man.
It's a measure, Garrett. I'm gonna let you talk, but you can't say it's one or the other. There's a measure. We don't, come on.
No, I agree with you there. I agree with you. It's a matter of how much of which. But let me give you a quote by a wise man named Sitting Bull. A fight is going on inside me, a terrible fight, and it's between 2 wolves. One is evil. He is angry, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. And he continued, the other is good. Inside is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you and inside every other person too. And then the child asking the grandfather the question said, well, which wolf will win? And he basically replied, the one that you feed. And so what I'm asking people to do is, yes, look at these 2 forces going on inside every one of us. We all have empathy. We all have greed. The question is, which one will you feed? And so what I'm asking people to do is to feed the empathy and to be the entrepreneur that decides to feed empathy.
But you're introducing, I hear you, and I apologize. You're giving us 1 minute. So we're all asked to try to keep it tight. So I'm going to ask the same of you. So what you're asking people is to go out and compete, but compete at a level which you will lose against other people that don't have those altruistic instincts. Okay.
Why do you think that?
Are you really not lose, excuse me, but you're going to compete against people, and that's going to be the level somebody's going to be able to say, that dumbass is overpaid his employees doing this, and this, we can beat him. And they will.
But how are they gonna beat me if I have better prices than them
You can't, come
And
on,
I have
dude.
a
It's a
better
market
product than that.
economy. You can't have better prices because you're egalitarian.
I'm already
That's not
doing
gonna
it,
be where
Don
your
John.
price-
Don John,
You're
come to
gonna have
New York
higher
City. I'll
paid
buy you
employees, you're
dinner, and I'll
suggesting.
introduce you to my company. I'm already doing it, and I'm
You got
already
a teeny
beating
tiny
them.
company. We're talking about a global economy.
Yes, give
All right,
me 5 years,
let's
Don
step
John.
back a little bit.
Don John, give me 5 years.
Oh, that's fine. Give me 5 years. Anyway, I think you're overlooking the reality of human nature here and trying to take a system, competitive capitalism, and turn it into something that has that is more for people that might be on this board here, who are empathetic, caring, possibly, you know, when I say liberal, I don't mean that in political standpoint, liberal about their social and economic thoughts. But very few of them here are probably really business owners with that thought, because let's face it, competition is the way you win in the market. It's a winner take all economy. And we got a monetary system that's disconnected from the advancement of the human condition. And when you have people are chasing money that has nothing to do with the advancement of the human condition or advancing society, it's just advancing one's pocketbook. You know, I'm not arguing against capitalism. I'm just think you haven't focused on where the problems are.
I think the problem is greed, and generous companies win in the free markets, and I think I'm going to prove that out.
True.
Well, we'll find out. So Ben, go ahead.
No, I got a few more. I got one more.
Don John, we give people one, maybe one at most two replies. You had two. We got to go to the next person.
You
we
gave
got like
people
8 hands up.
You gave people 10 minutes to say things and stuff. Okay, I'm not trying to say more. I'd like to say one more thing. And this is a promotion. I love what you're doing. Cooperation's the future, constitutional cooperation. I have a meetup this week. I'll post the link. I would love for you to come, Garrett, and see what I'm talking about, because what you're talking about fits into the concept of, we're talking about a distributed economy in a constitutional cooperation manner. So thank you for letting me speak and come to your meeting.
Thank you. It's always good to have you, Don John. And
no, it's not. You don't think so, because I get irritated.
Don John, I think you honed in on something that I forgot to respond to before because of the other stuff, which is the idea between cooperation and competition is key. And I didn't hone in on that enough. So I think we should have another conversation about cooperation versus competition another night. So
I would appreciate that, Garrett.
Another event. If you want to collaborate with me on preparing for it, reach out to me.
I would, if we could collaborate both, because I've worked 10 years on building. We have a platform that's already in alpha for constitutional cooperation. We're doing a lot of things.
Reach out to me, Don John.
I appreciate it.
I put my email in the chat, so I'll look forward to chatting with you. Ben, go ahead.
Hi there. I think that even if you can have a company that aims to be ethical and manages for some time to pay their employees more or reduce their environmental footprint, ultimately there is this cycle in capitalism of consumption and production, and that is what drives capitalism, or it drives the market. And if you don't take part in consumption and production, and you don't produce and you don't consume, then basically you are not going to get paid. You're not going to survive as a company. And there's no way around that. So if you start to push back against consumption and production as a company, then you're pushing back against basically your own existence, because you cannot survive.
I apologize, but what did I say that made you feel like I was pushing back against production or consumption?
Well, even if as like a company, you're involved in, say, like some kind of like delivery service, for example, and you expedite delivery and you maybe make it more efficient in some way. You're not going to push back against stopping delivery. You're not going to push back against stopping restaurants from producing food or stopping people from producing products, because you want that to keep going. You need it to keep going.
I didn't propose anything, I think, that would
but in in order to stop production and consumption, which is basically creating all of this unnecessary waste and environmental damage, this whole cycle, which basically is the problem, because unless we stop consumption and production, then we are not going to solve the problem. So you have even an ethical company, and this is in times when times are good. When the times are bad, the ethics go away because you cannot compete anymore. But even when times are good and you're able to pay your employees and still compete, when it comes to actually looking at the problem of climate change and saying, okay, we need to shut down consumption here, we need to degrow the economy and basically go back to a point where we're not overshooting, we're not consuming way more than we actually have in the planet as resources. There's no company that's going to say that, because it will destroy their own business. So, and not only that, every company that doesn't say that is going to push back very strongly against that.
So I don't think I said anything about consumption and production. I don't think it like has anything to do with whether or not you consume and produce ethical, environmentally friendly products. Those are two separate things. You don't have to cut off all consumption and production in order to be aligned with the environment. You have to consume and produce aligned with the environment products.
Well, consumption and production in itself is the problem, because it creates externalities.
So are you saying eating and drinking is the problem?
Well, if you're just eating and if you're foraging and you're basically hunting your own food, but once you start the cycle where people are basically consuming much more than they need just because they want to consume and drive the cycle, which is basically what we're doing now. People consume because they're basically informed by advertisements that they're insufficient. What they have is insufficient, so they consume more and more, and then that way
I know what you're talking about, but yeah. I didn't address any of that in the presentation. So I guess I think this is a little bit tangential. I'm happy to talk about it another night.
Well, it's not, because because basically capitalism is consumption. It is cyclical consumption. So capitalism is cyclical consumption.
No, that has nothing to do with capitalism. Capitalism only means that the means of production is owned by private entities. That's all capitalism means. Nothing more, nothing less. It has nothing to do with, you could have no consumption and no production, and it could still be capitalist, like as long as the means of production is owned by private entities, and they could produce nothing and starve everybody to death on earth.
Means of production. The word is right there.
They could produce nothing. They could produce nothing and starve everybody to death on earth. It would still be capitalist.
Well,
so look, I'm not gonna go into it with you. It's not tonight's topic. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to do an event on consumption and production and how to deal with it, but it doesn't have anything to do with generous capitalism, in my opinion. If you think it does, definitely raise your hand again and try to make a better way of connecting what you're saying to what I presented, because I'm not seeing the connection at all. So I want to go to Sherwin because we have a ton of hands up, but definitely, feel free to email me and we'll do another event. Because I think what you're talking about is important. I'm not trying to disparage it. I think it's great. It's important. We need to consume and produce ethically, but that,
you cannot disconnect it from market system. It is the market system.
So again, I'm going to go to Sherwin. Feel free to raise your hand and take another try at it if you want. All of what I talked about in B Corps and conscious capitalism is about being aligned with the environment, having production be aligned with the environment. So I think the solution, everything I presented tonight was about being aligned with the environment. Nothing was other than that. So, again, I don't see the connection. Feel free to raise your hand again if you want. But Sherwin, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the topic. It's really interesting. I don't agree or disagree. I just like to focus a little bit more on, I believe, is the cause. Technology caused this income and wealth disparity problem because it's easy to scale with technology. In the old days, you need to hire a whole bunch of people. Nowadays, you don't. Labor is kind of a little bit more irrelevant now. So instead of focusing on regulation, unionization, offshoring, or even capitalism being greedy, I think we have to be cognizant that technology is about to make this much worse. AI requires data at mega scale. not personal scale. So if we think that technology has caused disparity before, it's going to cause way worse disparity. The system has to change to push technology towards some kind of co-ownership, common ownership, or at least expiring ownership. Patents expire. I don't know why some other things cannot expire. Or I believe we're heading towards a world of trouble. So that was my succinct summary.
Thank you, Sherwin, for being pithy. I really appreciate that. I will pick a little bit of a nit in that I think you're blaming technology, but technology has been around for, not just hundreds of years, but a lot longer than that. But even just take into account the huge technological increases in the last couple hundred years until the 1970s, where we started to create this huge socioeconomic disparity in the US, technology was benefiting all strata of society up until the 1970s and shareholder capitalism. So I don't think technology is the right root cause, because historically for hundreds of years, technology just improved everybody's well-being. Yes, it improved wealthy people more because they made more money, but everybody benefited from the technological advances, including the poor and middle class.
That's precisely why I said the ownership of technology, right?
What's that?
The ownership and scalability of technology has changed. I mean, you can't deny, like, you write a piece of software, you can scale it like billion times. It's different. Things have
True,
changed.
but I guess, like, if you look at cobblers and mass production, the same level of technological improvement was made.
People were required in mass industrialization.
What's that?
People were involved in mass industrialization.
People are involved in software development too.
Oh, AI, ChatGPT. Wait till you see the next
doesn't
generation.
write software on its own, my friend. I use ChatGPT in software development all the time. I still need a development team. Even with no code, you still need
Remember, you said just wait 5 years. I'm going to say the same thing. Wait 5 years. Let's see what happens.
Hey, look, let's put it this way, Sherwin. If AI can build total software products without any human intervention, and they're as effective as things that are being built by humans, that AI is probably going to be pseudosentient.
AI has no soul. AI has no soul. It can't. But it can make you goddamn fast in programming, though.
Yeah. So let's see, and we'll hold that event when 5 years comes, if you're right. So DLJ, go ahead. Thanks, Sherwin, for your question.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks. I'll try and make it pithy and succinct as well. I love these meetups. They always make me feel really good about not living in the USA. So my internet has been up and down like a thing that goes up and down a lot. So I missed the bit that I was waiting for, which was your solution. But for everybody else's sake, I'm not asking you to recap it all. Instead, I'll suggest something, which I think now you didn't suggest, because you said you didn't talk about unions. And I'm not talking about the producer unions, like trade unions, production side. I'm talking about consumer unions. So I think there's collective purchasing power, either by boycotting or a bank exit was something they did over DAPL, if you remember. The National Health Service in the UK, the government, it does the collective purchase, is the collective purchasing power for the NHS. So therefore we get cheap meds, unlike you guys. So I'm calling these consumer unions, and I think it's what Facebook was made for. That kind of thing, but that's because corporations listen to, they look at their bottom line, right? So if the bottom line is affected by people not buying stuff, that's going to help them change their behavior. Agree or not? Yes or no? And then we move on to the next person.
Love the idea. If I make money, DLJ, let's talk about it, because I have ideas tangentially in that direction that I would love to collaborate with you on. So if you hear news that Playrate is like a major household name someday, then reach out to me and let's talk. Thank you, DLJ. Good suggestion. I love the solution. I did not propose that, and I love it. So Ibrahim.
Yeah, I want to try and avoid sort of addressing a question that sort of has you personified as capitalism, because in many ways I think that the suggestions that you're bringing forwards are really constructive suggestions that obviously acknowledge the fact that there are issues in capitalism, which I think is a big deal. I think in many ways the propaganda around capitalism has us convinced that the end of the world is more likely to happen before the end of capitalism, and it's just an economic system like all systems before it that we construct as human beings, and we can deconstruct and improve. But my question to you, Garrett, is at some point in your presentation, really interestingly, you brought up democracy, and it's something that we very much sort of take for granted, politically, within political systems here in the West. It's not something actually a lot of places in the world enjoy, and it's seen as incredibly impractical. They don't enjoy it because it's seen as impractical. It's seen as inefficient. It's much more efficient to have a dictator making all the decisions. And you're absolutely right in saying that our corporations, we spend half our waking lives in them, and they are, total dictatorships. So to what degree do you feel democracies could play a role? Because I correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I understand it, B Corps do not have the idea of sort of democratization or democracy in the workplace as a core tenet. How do you feel about democracies in the workplace? I guess you suggested that it could be achieved through equity, and I think it can to a certain degree, right? If you're a worker who builds up equity in a company, you have more of a say, and I think that's a way maybe of injecting a sort of democracy there. But how do you feel about the kind of democracy we enjoy politically being in the workplace? Voting for kind of key milestones and key decisions, voting as a company together. What are your thoughts on that?
So I have a love-hate relationship with it. I thought about starting my company as a democracy, where it would be, but I said that's, I didn't feel comfortable starting, my first company that way. But if I can make enough money, I would like to start organizations that are democratically driven. I am, very much running my company in that way, in that, almost every decision made is made by democratic agreement. I would say there have been maybe two decisions or three decisions where we didn't have a majority in agreement with a decision, since founding the company like 5 or 6 years ago. So very rare exceptions, but I think that the idea of democratically run companies, and someone mentioned Mondragon, which is employee owned. I don't know exactly what their structure looks like, but I love the idea of empowering individuals in a company and giving everybody a voice. And democracy really does give everybody a voice and make sure that their voice is heard, because if people in power don't do the right thing, then people will vote them out of power. But that's not how companies are run today. So I would love to, see democratically run companies, with the right structures, see whether or not they could compete against autocratically run companies. And we've seen that democratically run governments compete quite well against autocratically run countries. So why should it not be the same case for corporations? So if that's something that's of interest to you, I will tell you, feel free to reach out to me via email. It's something that I want to explore. I have very little spare time, but would love to noodle on, and I have one potential person to collaborate with already on that. But it's a matter of time and when, and most likely it'll come after my company is more profitable. But it's I did digress on it, and you honed in on it's important to me. It's just not my current priority. Thank you for the question, Ibrahim. Kay, go ahead.
Pardon me, I didn't realize my hand was still up. I've forgotten my point. I'm sorry. I was responding to people in the chat. I'll let someone else take my turn.
Okay.
Thanks.
Carrie, just put your hand up again, Kay, and or if you want to keep it up, we can come back to you. But okay, Carrie, go ahead. She took it down.
Okay. Real quick for Abraham. Dictator's Handbook is a book you might find very, very interesting to politics, dictatorship that really aren't as different as we generally think. Check it out. I think you might like it. So this is just a question regarding tax and tax rates. I mean, yes, tax rates were higher, but before 1913, there was no income tax. Still managed to have roads and bridges and things got done. Just another data point along the I find that at one level, I hear a lot of folks saying we need more taxation, at least for certain population. Yet in almost the same breath, I hear a corrupt government and how inefficient it is. And it seems like, aren't you I mean, are we taxing folks that are actually producing the things that make society better to punish rebellious? I mean, until we address the link between corruption and inefficiency, I think that's a huge problem. You know, why should we take more money from people? I'm done.
You broke up a bit there, Carrie, so I may not have gotten the whole thing. I'm gonna try to respond to can you try to summarize really quickly? I want to make sure I understood.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, it just more taxation if there's a system of corruption and inefficiency seems like a bad idea. How do don't we need to address the corruption and inefficiency first before increasing tax rates?
So I think we have to do both, to be honest. We need to do both. We need, like, right now we're in a ridiculous amount of debt, and the debt is getting bigger all the time, and that's not good. And so we need to cut costs, we need to increase revenue, we need to decrease, corruption, and we have to do it all at once. Like it's not one at a time, and we're not going to make anything perfect before we moved on to the next thing. We need to improve everything incrementally, little by little. And that's what we call, or what the Japanese call kaizen, or continuous improvement. And that's the culture that my company has as well, is one of continuous improvement. Because if you improve everything a little bit every day, you suddenly become way better than everybody else, within a couple of years. And I think it's not one or the other or sequential. We have to do all of them at once. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool.
Agree. Okay.
Made sense to Sean.
Cannot cut the expense or to get rid of debt. You have two things, right? Revenue and curb expenses. So you have to be two ways.
Try to keep, I forgot to say, like, if someone wants to respond to either something that I just said or something that Carrie just said, you want to, like, ask a clarifying question or make a quick comment, like less than 20 or 30 seconds, like Sean just did, just feel free to speak up like Sean just did. Just keep it short, like very short, like under 20 or 30 seconds, ideally under 20 seconds, just short, quick comments. But I want people to be able to comment on each other's stuff. Like, it shouldn't just be me and the person raising their hand talking. Like, I really want to encourage dialogue amongst everybody and have everybody feel like they can participate no matter who's speaking up. But it should be very short and pithy. Just think about what you're going to say before you say it. So, Ella, go ahead.
Something short and quick.
If you have a quick response to what was just said, Mike, go ahead.
I go back to the systems problem. Mike Tyson's comment, everybody has a plan that's foolproof until they get punched in the mouth. That's a question that everything is, that all economics is behavior, everything is economics, and I yield the balance of my time. Oh, yeah, one more thing, quick. we don't have there are only a few people that have economics background in government. They're all lawyers, and that's why we get all these laws that make it complicated.
Thanks, Mike. And I don't normally I will not very often agree that boxers have a good intellectual wisdom, but Mike Tyson's one there is pretty good, and that's why I like continuous improvement, because if we're constantly making everything we can better, we're going to move to a better place, although that requires seeing the truth clearly, which gets to your point about economics. So that's what the 5 intentions are intended to do, is to help people see the truth more clearly first, and then only once you see the truth more clearly, then you can make better decisions. And anyone that wants to learn more about that, I'm going to put the links about the FTI into the chat, and let Ella go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just going back a few speakers. Just commenting on what Sherwin had to say. Actually, he has a very good point. I mean, everything is changing technologically and really fast. And yes, our government should be stable. Capitalism isn't stable. It's been around 200 years, but it's totally fixing itself and repairing itself. We have a lot of global situations going on. So ask yourself, what is a more stable government? A government where people are employed, a government where people are not polarized and trying to do huge global initiatives that when we don't even feed the poor in our own country or take care of all of them from all different various groups. So we have all of these, this instability and an inability for the government to address our concerns. As we are all citizens, we elect our government officials. We send them to Washington or to the State House, and do they vote the way we want them to? No, not really. How many parties do we have? We have 2, Twiddledum and Twiddledee, and yet we continue to support that type of thing. I think we're also talking from the presentation was a rather elitist view. I'll be quite frank about it. I think it's naive. I think there are a lot of parts of the country that are struggling. And I think that the well-educated elites are doing fine. I think a lot of people are not doing well and do need for the government to control capitalism more than it does.
Ella?
Yes.
Garrett needs to speak again.
Okay.
So Ella, I'm curious why you felt it was an elitist view to say that we should pay employees more and be more generous with business partners. What's elitist about that?
Well, I mean, some of your statements about, programmers and program designers, computer program designers. How many people actually work in that field presently? I mean, if you don't look at the farmers, if you don't look at the coal miners, if you don't look at the steel workers, if you don't look at the people that deliver your packages and make your Starbucks in the morning, and realize they are all equal.
Ella, Garrett is including everyone, including sex workers, including artists, everyone.
Okay, I'm going based on what he said today.
Ella, I think you're jumping to an assumption that my example is meant to be demonstrative of the entirety of my argument, which it wasn't. It was just demonstrative of an example. it was only a simple example based on my experience in my adult life. Although I grew up very poor and was delivering papers when I was in elementary school and could barely stay awake in school to make enough money to be able to buy candy at a store. So, you know, I'm not a silver spoon in my mouth kind of guy. And I'm not neglecting the common person. I'm actually saying we need to pay the common person better across all industries, all backgrounds. So I'm sorry there was misunderstanding there, but that's what I really mean, not what you heard.
Well, I can only, I'm sorry, I didn't know that backstory. And thank you for sharing that. You don't have to, but I appreciate it. Yeah, I didn't know, but I was talking about your comments about technology and
yeah, I mean, I went into technology because I knew that it was going to transform the world and I knew that I could make a good living at it. And I've been lucky enough, you know, I basically vowed to work my butt off my whole like schooling so that I would not be poor as an adult like I grew up. And so that's you know, part of what motivated me to work, you know, ridiculous like hours and study really hard and get straight A's in, you know, high school and college. But you know, we do need to consider everything you're saying, Ella. We need to consider all walks of life. And that's why I started a not-for-profit whose goal it is to make not just everybody in America, literally everybody in the world, enough money that more money doesn't buy happiness. I'm not a nationalist. Like I think everybody in the world deserves to live a good life. And I don't think anyone should be poor no matter where they live. Doesn't matter. Like just because you grew up in the wrong country, that doesn't mean you should be exiled to a life in which you have no opportunity. Everybody should have an opportunity, and we should all be working towards creating that opportunity for everybody in the world.
well, I agree. Who wouldn't agree with that?
A lot of people wouldn't agree with that. Nationalists would
Well, I
say we
mean,
need to
wait.
protect American jobs. We need to keep all the money in America. And
I was
you
going
know,
to go on to say it's a lot more manageable to manage your own household, feed your own children, isn't it now? I mean, at the beginning, and when you're stabilized, you help other people in peaceful ways.
right.
Of course, we all want to help the world. Who doesn't? I mean, we all
Yeah.
do.
I wish everybody did, Ella, but I think someone made it
should we have the poverty we have in Appalachia right now and be sending jobs overseas? Come on now. How about Detroit? How
Ella,
about
the jobs that are going overseas are not taking away from the employment opportunities in the US. That's what I said earlier.
Yes,
Is
they are.
look at the statistics, Ella. Like you should go to the event, the recording of the event that we held on immigration. If you look at the event that we held on immigration, I gave a lot of research statistics, which basically showed if we took every unemployed American and we trained them in a job that, you know, they could become employed in, and they took every open job, there would still be millions of open jobs in America. There are plenty of jobs in America. We just don't have good job training. We don't have people taking the initiative to train themselves in the skills that they need to have. And right now it's super easy to do that. Just play with ChatGPT for a couple of weeks. You'll learn a new skill set and you'll learn how to do a new job. All you have to do is ask the right questions to the AI and you will learn a new valuable job that will pay you 6 figures. It's all very doable.
Do you really believe that?
I actually have done it for people. I've gotten Whoop, can you hear me? Hello? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, Garrett.
Okay, I don't know what just happened there. That was weird.
Yeah,
I can hear you, Garrett.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really think you understand. I'm saying that a poor kid born from a generationally poor family can earn 6 figures by going on the internet for a few weeks.
I have helped poor kids from poor families that went to community colleges make 6 figures because they worked hard, they studied, and I helped train them. And yes, it can happen. I've trained people in
Garrett,
the product management boot camp.
not the
You know,
rule. Is
what's that?
You can find exceptions to everything. That's the old.
Yeah,
who yourself-
the key word is it can happen, not that it always
Yeah,
happens.
I have done it.
We're in a winner-take-all economy, and not everybody can win. That's just simple.
Don John, if you have a question that you want to clarify,
Garrett, I had a point I wanted to make. Other people have spoken in.
Yeah. So it's not a winner take all economy. It's a growing the pie and
For
making
you to
the
say
pie
that,
bigger.
of course it is a winner take all. That's how it's structured.
It's not. There's
Why
a competitive.
why do we have now so few corporations controlling every industry? Because they're consolidating, because that's what competitive capitalism does. You're off the mark, man. You think you know everything. And I'm so tired of listening to your idiocy.
Don John, the one rule we have here is to be polite.
I'm going. I don't care. You're fucking out of your mind, man. You're controlling these things.
Not polite,
this
Don.
guy's right. No, you're not right, sir.
Conversation.
You're a part of a joke.
So we
right.
do only have one rule,
okay.
and it is to remain polite. He's a nice guy. He means well. He's just frustrated, but we can't have people talking like that. Ben, why don't you go next?
Thanks. I'm not impolite. I'm not going to be impolite in any way. And I appreciate the forum. So that is definitely a good thing, Garrett. The issue I have though is that capitalism basically is about ownership of production, ownership of services, and ultimately it's a machine that is going to kill us all, and pushing it is taking part in it. So you have basically nothing in our economic system that incentivizes like habitat sustainability. There is no, you can have a company that says, okay, I like habitat sustainability, but it's always going to be secondary to their primary motive, which is to keep in business. And as financial stress increases, companies become less ethical. So you have to remain competitive and profitable. And when you become less ethical and you have to keep going, the people who suffer are the poor, the people who get laid off, the workers, the environment. And this is it's an externality of the system. It's built in.
So there are two solutions to that, Ben. One is through government regulation, where everybody has to agree to, everybody has to keep to certain environmental standards, or they will be penalized enough that it's more in their best interest to keep with those standards. The second thing is through market forces, where you can do like the B Corp that I presented. In a B Corp, you have to be environmentally friendly, or you don't get the B Corp certification. You don't have the stamp of approval. If everybody is well informed as to whether or not there are, let's say there are 3 people selling cereal, and you can choose, do you want the one that's B Corp certified or the 2 that are not? If you choose to shop with the B Corp certified one, and so does everybody else, everybody will shop with the B Corp certified one, and then the ones that are not environmentally friendly will go bankrupt because they have no customers. And that's about knowledge, transparency, informed consumers, and voting with our wallets for what we think the world should be like. And obviously that also requires consumers to have enough money to be able to vote with their wallets if the B Corp is more expensive. In generous capitalism, the B Corp may well be cheaper than the greedy capitalists because they're keeping all the money for themselves. And so actually the B Corp could be the cheaper option. That said, those would be the 2 ways that I addressed that. I don't know if you have a response to that you wanted to mention. And the last, just quickly, if not capitalism, what's your alternative to capitalism that you think doesn't have this consumer-driven situation? What do you think is the alternative?
I think that the idea that consumers are going to set kind of a morality, underestimates the necessity of people to buy things, not only for their survival, but also because of the media, which constantly makes them feel inferior. And the media itself is fed by advertisements, which is fed by capitalists. So the consumers are not in control at all in this. It's 100% controlled by those who have power, who have the money. And there is no incentive for them, therefore, from the consumers to become a B-type company. They have only incentive to maximize themselves. An option out would be, I think, we have to develop a system that is resource-based, a resource-based economy. So something that distributes things democratically, based on citizenry, not from top down, from determined by people, but it has to be resource-based, not based on capitalist greed.
Okay, maybe describe that in the online community a little bit more, because I don't know what you mean by resource-based, but not top-down, because the only alternatives I know to capitalism are socialism and communism, and both of those are top-down. So if you have some, idea of a democratic, the best that I could come up with is if we had, lots of Mondragons that were around the world that were worker-owned companies that are democratically run, although Don John said that they have outside management that can't be voted out. I don't know about that, but I haven't researched that closely. And that is stuff that, like I said, I'm experimenting with in what little spare time I have. I think those are cool ideas, but we're not there yet, in my opinion. Whereas generous capitalism, we are there and we can do it. And I think we should all try to support generous companies when we can, so that we can make generous capitalism a step closer, which I think is a step in the right direction, in terms of being environmentally friendly and more generous with all stakeholders. That said, I want to let Ibrahim go, and then feel free to raise your hand again, Ben, if you want to go again. Thanks for your comments.
I want to say quickly as well, Garrett, I really appreciate your patience and your resilience. There's obviously a lot of sort of, a lot of critiquing and pushback. And I think, part of the work of establishing kind of new norms is, being able to contend with, a lot of criticisms and pushback. So I think that's, I think it's clearly, you're doing sort of the right thing and trying to pave a new path. But I'd like to sort of have a broader chat. So this question is to sort of everyone on the chat, and to yourself as well, of course, Garrett. But I've been listening to sort of Ben and Kerry, and I think Ella, I don't know if she's on the chat anymore, and I've been saying some really interesting things. And I wanted to contend with them a little bit, and to see if we can kind of get anywhere constructive. To steelman the B Corp idea for a second, I think we all, anybody in sort of the employment market is familiar with websites like Glassdoor or Fishbowl, and all these websites sort of suggest that the more transparency you have as a company, the more likely you are to be attractive to prospective employees. And so I think you're totally right there, Garrett, that a B Corp will have those inherent attractive natures for prospective employees, and they're more likely to flock to the company. But I think the other side of this, on the kind of consumer side, and I think maybe these are some of the concerns that Ben's been voicing, is that even today we have companies like, my wife, for example, she's very much into sort of fashion and buying clothes and stuff. And there's a Chinese company called Shein, I think it's called. Now, this company is sort of transparently as unethical as humanly possible. It's as exploitative of labor as possible, and that's reflected in their prices. Their prices are outrageously cheap because explicitly because they exploit their labor so intensely. And yet Shein is by far the largest growing market retail, sort of clothes retailer out there, and many of the companies that had positioned themselves as more ethical companies in terms of the way they're producing their clothes and stuff are beginning to have to look at the Shein model in order to sort of survive and stay stay in existence, fundamentally. And so I think there are, there's a tug of war happening, right, to a certain degree. I think in the West in particular, and I don't think we should I think in the West, because of the economic prosperity that we've had, we've begun to be able to worry about higher ideals, like how ethical is the way that we're producing things, which is, I think, incredibly important. But I think in a massive global market where we are competing with nations that aren't there yet, and nations that are prioritizing, building as much, generating as much profit and wealth as possible, like China, for example, we are at a disadvantage in that regard. And I think it's a good disadvantage to be at. We should absolutely be worrying about the ethical practices of our business and how we're generating money. And so, this seems to be an impasse there, right? It does seem like these two things are headlogs, or loggerheads even. And so to me, it feels that the only way you deal with that is by, first of all, legislating, because, in the United States, ignoring China for a minute, in the United States, a B Corp will be competing against non-B Corp structures, right, that are prioritizing profits above everything else. And so I think you not only do you have, obviously, you have kind of consumer conscientiousness, which is growing absolutely, and that's an incredibly powerful thing. But I think you do need legislation in the same way that we legislate against oil companies. We didn't before, but we now legislate against oil companies just kind of pouring their waste into the oceans because it's cheaper and quicker for them to do that. We have a red line somewhere that says, no, this is too exploitative. I think there should be legislation, a very simple legislation, not overbearing. That simply, and I don't know exactly in what form, these discussions that can be had. The legislation that really primarily seeks to do what you're suggesting, Garrett, here in your proposal of B Corp, which is begin to prioritize the well-being of human beings, right, over minorities or shareholders, the minority of the population shareholders who have massive stake in companies. So for me, it feels unavoidable that some amount of legislation is necessary and required. But I want to kind of hear your thoughts, everyone's thoughts, and maybe I'm wrong on that. Someone has a better suggestion.
Yeah, I do agree with you that some level of legislation is necessary. We already have some level of legislation protecting us from, the most egregious harms from corporations. Although sometimes even those are ignored or people lose in court against those big corporations because they just don't have the money to even defend themselves, and they don't know the resources available to help them. But I do think that legislation could be very helpful. But personally, I don't have great legislative connections. And so, what I'm trying to do is be a practicing Stoic, which I am, and do what's in my control, which is to educate consumers and say, look, if you guys all decide to become more well-informed about where you buy food and where you buy clothing, which, by the way, Shein's, popularity amongst millennials dropped by 7% last year, which shows that there probably is some awareness of their lack of ethics, and the demand is probably dropping off. And if people were more well-informed, it would probably drop off more. And that's where I would argue that we should use the free markets for the beautiful thing that they are. I love free markets. I joke with a lot of people that well, how do I say that? I joke that I'm generous capitalism is more capitalistic than greedy capitalism, because the generous companies, like I said, should win in the free markets. And actually, generous capitalist companies, again, like, who would rather do business with a greedy company than one that's more generous? Do you want a better product at a lower price that pays their employees better? Or do you want the greedy company that takes a bigger corporate profit and pays their shareholders a bigger dividend? Which one are you going to do business with? Like, the free markets should naturally favor generous companies. We just need to found them, and we need to support them. And we need to be well aware of which companies are generous companies. And B Corps, by the way, are not my invention. It sounded like you thought they might be. They're not. They're okay, as long as you knew that. I don't want to take credit for something I didn't come up with. I'm building on top of a B Corp because I think it's a great legal structure. you know, I want to be one, and that's great. But so that's all I would say is I think that the free markets can solve this even without government legislation. And I think the government does many good things, but they also do a lot of bad things. And I don't want to wait around for government to do the right thing, because while they do a lot of good things, there's two wolves in the government too, and which one wins is the one that has the most political power and gets the most votes, and that's not always the one that's more ethical, quite frankly. And there's not always one that's, you know, like a clear winner. And all I can say, there's a lot of hands, so let me just keep going. Thank you for your questions, Ibrahim. Nothing you said was at all impolite. Calling someone an idiot, whether it's me or anyone else in the group, is just not appropriate. And I did warn him, and I said, look, you got to be polite. And then he swore, and so I was like, all right, that, you know, that's like, I can't, if I don't throw someone out that does that, then no one else will take it seriously if they get warned. So I just have to do it. Otherwise, people aren't going to listen when they get warned. And so I will warn everybody first. I'm not going to throw someone out without a warning, but you know, politeness, like without that, we don't remain in the logical portion of our brain. And I want everybody to be thinking clearly. And if we get emotional, then we stop thinking clearly. And so the rule to be polite is really to help us all seek truth better and to see the truth, especially when we're wrong. And if we're not being polite, then people aren't going to listen to us as well anyway, right? So that said, Mike, how are you? Mike, you're on mute. Oh my God, it's 9:30. We got to finish. I've been up since like 5 this morning. So I'm gonna let Mike go, and then we're gonna close out. Mike, are you there?
Mike Sorn.
All right, let me just actually put the event for next week into the chat. Go ahead.
I would like to respond to like something that Carrie said, I think, and another person about capitalism being like a winner take all. You know, that seems to be like the prevailing idea for a lot of people, but it really is not. You know, it only is when it comes to, in capitalism, you know, the companies privatize wins and socialize losses. So for example, you know, during the 2008 crash, like we bailed them out, like they should have died, you know, if it's winner takes all and they should all just die, then all the banking system should have collapsed. But no, we bailed them out. And then another thing is that, you know, Martin Luther King said that in America, we have socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor. And a lot of coal companies, natural gas companies, they receive $5.9 trillion in 2020 on subsidies. And they're the highest profitable companies in the world. And we're subsidizing their efforts. So this whole idea that, you know, capitalism is, it's just the winner takes all and all this stuff, it's ridiculous to a certain degree. Only when it's convenient for them is winner takes all, when it's about profits. But when it comes to losses and when there's catastrophes, then they want to socialize the losses and get all the money that they can get. And also, if capitalism realizes its ambition to become, like, for example, a company that becomes a monopoly, like for example, Microsoft, they become a monopoly, then you eliminate the competition and brings the market to a standstill. So it kind of cannibalizes itself if it reaches the ultimate conclusion that, you know, you're the winner takes all, then the whole market system crashes because there's no competition to be had.
I mean, even if you look at if you look at my industry in food tech, there's Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Grubhub. Originally, there was only Grubhub. There was no one else. Well, DoorDash ended up, taking over more market share from Grubhub. Now they're both greedy companies. DoorDash is even greedier, but they took over more market share from Grubhub. Uber Eats has carved out about a third of the industry. It's not a winner-take-all industry. There are 3 oligopolies that are, vying for market share across each other. They're all greedy companies. So it's definitely not winner take all. There are some monopolies, and monopolies haven't been busted up. We should actually talk about monopolies. That's another good topic. I've been wanting to debunk Bork's arguments on monopolies for a long time publicly. And Bork is a man named Bork was the one that basically put an end to the busting up of monopolies that used to happen when they came about, and were causing a detriment. But we'll come to that. But that said, I want to close out because we're way past time, and I apologize. I should have closed out at 9. I normally get so tired that I just am falling asleep, and I just lost track of time because it was good conversation, which I want to thank all of you for the questions, the comments. Really appreciate everybody's questions and comments. Really good conversation. Appreciate everybody being here and coming. I put the event for next week in. If you want to talk about thought experiments and when they can be productive and when they're not productive, I'm actually going to make a good argument that unrealistic thought experiments actually cause you to come to the wrong conclusions. Not only are they not useful, they will actually create disinformation. So come listen, because they are considered super cool in the philosophy community. I'm going to try to buck that trend, and as usual, I come up with different perspectives than the norm. As people have pointed out tonight, I get a lot of criticism for that. I'm okay with that. I don't mind if everyone agrees with me, disagrees with me. All I care about is that we have opinions and that we share them with each other, and that everybody come to their own conclusions about what's right and wrong, and that we don't vilify each other. And that's where I'll pick a nit with what you said, Betsy. Even though I agreed with you, let's not call other people's opinions ridiculous or vilify them. We want to say why we disagree with them logically, so that other people will follow our logic, not say those ideas are bad ideas or good ideas. We want to say this is the idea and this is the logic, and this is why I think this makes sense, and this is my opinion, and defend it. And I'm picking nits with you, Betsy, but I love everything you have to say, and I appreciate it. I'm just picking nits because I want to get extra polite so that we can all stay in the very logical portions of our brain and learn from each other. And I think that the long arc of time will tell which ideas are the best. And as long as we have transparency and freedom and democracy, those good ideas will come out. And as long as we keep sharing good ideas with our friends and family, and I would love for people to invite people to these events if you're enjoying them, and come to next week's event and join the online community, and let's get that more active. It's done through Discord, and we can chat throughout the week. I'm also going to be creating a WhatsApp group for anyone interested. Reach out to me for that in the Discord community or through email. I put my email in the chat as well. So hope everybody has a great rest of your night, or you can reach out to me on Meetup as well.
Can you re-enable the chat so I can save it?
Say that again.
The chat is disabled, so it doesn't have the 3 dots where you can save a copy.
Let me see how I do that. What do you need? Do you need my email?
Well, I usually take a copy of all the chat that happened, and I'm missing like an hour because I haven't taken a copy recently, and
I don't know how to re-enable that, to be honest.
Because it's disabled for compliance purposes.
I think you can still copy and paste though.
I've tried it. You can only copy.
Try again now.
You can only copy one message at a time. You can't select all.
I'm going to head, but thank you very much for this, Garrett. It was really informative.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Thanks for your. Okay, try again.
Yeah, I think it's available now. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead and copy it now. And thanks again, everybody, for coming. Thanks for comments and questions, and hope everybody has a great night. Did you get it? TC?
Thank you.
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Great. Everyone take care. Bye-bye.